Welcome back to The Exchange by Evolution, a melting pot of ideas and inspiration shared by some of the most successful tech leaders. I'm Liyana, and I help connect businesses with tech talent, and today I'm your host. In today's episode, we'll be discussing on the topic collaboration in data, how cross-functional teams can drive innovation. Joining me for the session is Piyush, who's part of the marketing, analytics, and strategy team at Twilio, and Devi, who's an analytics manager at Foot Locker. Yeah, just a disclaimer before we get into, the discussion. All thoughts and views spoken by any of the speakers or myself are only representative of each individual and not that of their organization. So yeah, now that we've gotten that out of the way, would you guys like to introduce yourself? Maybe Devi can start first.
My name is Devi Vijayakumar. I'm part of Foot Locker Asia Pacific team, and I'm leading the data analytics department for them. It's been like a long 7 years in Singapore. I'm working towards data analytics capabilities.
Cool. Okay. Piyush.
I'm Piyush. I take care of marketing strategy and analytics for Twilio. Been with Twilio for almost 1.5 years. In my past life, I used to work in a consulting firm. So my entire a decade-long experience has been mostly in consulting. I took a big leap of faith and moved into a product firm 18 months back.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think both of you are sort of in the marketing department, right? So I think that's the reason why I feel like data and marketing is such an interesting space now. And because of that, we've gotten you guys to discuss the topic about collaboration in data. So I guess the first question is, why is collaboration important in the first place, right? So maybe Piyush, you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. If you think about the data landscape in the past decades, it's not only the data volume and the sources and the channels that have increased, but also just the roles and sheer number of people. Like back in 2010, there were hardly a bunch of people who could operate on data. Like I'm not talking about Excel-based data, but actually data, like a big data. I started my career as a business analyst, and then I got into a data scientist role. I did a little bit of machine learning, engineering, software product development, strategy. I have played at least 10 different roles in my life, and we are seeing a lot more of that. So as things are evolving, we are seeing just the volume of people, the roles that are coming up into the system, more functions getting integrated with data, using data, interfacing with data. All of this creates different skill sets, different priorities for different teams. And that mandates that these people have to work together. So I think if you think about like a prerequisite of innovation, I think one of the fundamental things is how we can get all of these different skill sets to come and work together. So that's been one of the things that I have seen evolve very.
Yeah. I think, it's important skills to know, right? Devi, what would you like to add to it?
Yeah, I agree to Piyush, and from my perspective, I've seen a data team that works in silos, and we just develop products and try to penetrate into the business team. But when we try a collaborative effort where everyone collaborate, explore on ideas, I see a lot of opportunities coming in, and a product became a huge success, and we see a lot of penetration to the users, business team, and it in a way it also helps us to improve, understand the business, and use data to a high potential. In past, some of my roles I've seen we use a bare minimum of data. We believe it's very important, but when we do this collaboration, we see like the importance of data when business helps us to understand. And when all of the team works together, there's a lot of ideas, innovation, and final products belong to all the data products. They see the importance of using it. We see at least a 50% increase in all of the use of this product. And that is a huge success, I would say. And that is coming to collaboration.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm seeing is, with all this remote first, and just how the organizational dynamics is changing globally, a lot more teams are now dipping into data. The one big change that it is bringing is just how it's very important to collaborate not only on how to use their data, but also to think about, like, a lot of, like, even at Twilio, for example, like when we set up the strategy for a region, like in the region, what do we do? Which products do we sell? Which markets do we become very important that sales is looped into that discussion, marketing is looped into that discussion, product is looped into that discussion. So this cross-functional sort of strategy development happens with data at the core. So that's another theme that's happening more, especially with remote first. It's also becoming a lot more challenging just for teams to think about how to collaborate on it.
Yeah. And I think the thing about remote, and just that's one of the challenges, right? But in general, collaboration can be challenging with different teams. Not everyone is literate in data. So how do you guys do it? How do you guys overcome this? And what are some of the challenges that, you've faced?
In collaboration?
Yeah.
I think there are two themes of problem lies, and Devi, feel free to add, but one is very explicit and obvious. Like, there are different teams, obviously there'll be different skill sets, different priorities, different ways to operate, ways of working, processes, the way people document, like the way I document my stuff versus how a product team would operate and document, it's very different. So these things are very obvious. They create some of the challenges in collaboration. But the other thing that I'm seeing a lot more with these newer workforce coming into the ground is some of these implicit behaviors. For example, I want ownership of a work, right? So if I'm collaborating with 10 different teams, how do I measure what I have done? How do I get credit for it? These implicit behaviors and desires, they're slightly difficult to control in a collaborative environment, but I think the explicit ones are much more easier. And again, like you said, in the remote first environment, like if I'm talking to you in person, it's very easy for me to understand your body language and change how I talk or how I collaborate. But in remote first, some of those dynamics also become a little more challenging. But these two themes, like the explicit ones, are very obvious. Just people with different skill sets, ways of working with. It's a challenge to work in.
I agree to that. And part of things I notice is when you work with different people in different regions, and when you do a collaboration, there can be conflicts sometimes because you're working in a space where there should be a motive of what we are trying to do. So in Foodrobber, what we have seen is there's a lot of stand-ups. So what happens is what do you mean by stand-up is every department will nominate a person from each team, like marketing, sales, etc. And they would come over and take the ownership of the part they are doing for this data project. And each of weekly or bi-weekly, they will share the improvement or the progress of the goal. And there is KPIs associated with each of the team member of what they have to do. And once they come in, and when you nominate the person within a team, you will see a lot of things, a lot of conflicts reduce a lot because the person understands what we are doing. And when a group of people work, it is important that we share the goal. And when this stand-ups happen, we will always make sure that we share the goal. And if there's a conflict, we make sure that it can be addressed. And sometimes there can be a lot of roadblocks that can be also kind of measured in these stand-ups. And it helps a lot in terms of conflict. And it also helps to prioritize. So everyone knows this is the timeline for this project, and you can share the ideas. You can kind of elaborate if there's any issue, and that somehow help to solve some of the virtual issues. And working together in the team, we make sure that we get the right person to lead that project from different departments. That's very important. Because if the person doesn't know what we are doing or there is a conflict, it always can lead to a lot of timeline issues, and the project can keep going on a long time. So getting the ideas clear, communication, and getting the timeline clear, it's very important. And there should be a person from the data team that can manage and bridge between the teams and make sure that everything is in place. So I believe that kind of helps in some of the working. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess the stand-ups is a way at Foodlocker for all of you to just sort of regroup and make sure everybody's aligned and just, keep up every now and then. Okay, yeah, and interesting that you mentioned, it's picking the right leader of the project. How are there any characteristics in terms of that leader that you're picking on, skills that, says this person should be leading this project? How do you guys decide?
Okay. can start maybe saying like we believe certain functions would be belonging to in a team would be more prioritized within a certain team members. So maybe there's a project lead within a marketing team who will be more people person. Why people person in the terms that a person would be able to communicate and make sure that they reach the right people on the right time, and there shouldn't be any conflict of communication. So we find someone who can elaborate ideas and communicate it well. So that is finding the right person, and sometimes it depends on the project itself. Like it is belonging to a certain domain, we find the person who is an expertise on that area, so there's no conflict. And even then, we also help to nominate, like the team can nominate who can work on it. So there is a balance at work, so that the person is not sharing a lot of projects at the same time. So usually we see that works well. So nomination or seeing that the person belongs to that code helps sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I think so the two challenges I spoke about, and there's this one which is more controllable, things like priorities, skill sets, people. So you need someone who has a good project managerial foundation. So that's like 101. But what's happening now is, like I said, the workforce mix is changing so much. The skill set mix is changing so much. Priorities, what personally I want to do is changing so much. And this is happening across multiple teams. So you also need someone, like Devi said, who understands people very well, who can keep the vision of the project in mind, but also make sure that personally everyone's ambitions are met. Who can also channel, and I think one of the very important things which is required, especially in these like multi-functional collaborative setups, is somebody who can keep the company culture intact. And that's a very difficult. So you need someone who understands what the company's vision is, not get muddled by what individual ambitions are. So I think broadly these. So I think project managerial definitely, skills, expertise. You should understand, like Devi said, you have to understand what the project is all about. Plus the cultural element of just making sure that everybody thinks along the same vision and line of thought.
Okay. And how does the data team sort of fit into this whole equation, because there's so many different teams working together, and most of the time, or at least some of the projects, are very much centered around data, right? The data that is used. So how do they fit in? Like, how do you guys help out?
I can take a stab very quickly because it's along the same theme. So again, the intrinsic issues, like will I get credit, will I get ownership, those are very difficult to solve. But the more controllable ones, like like marketing and sales are collaborating, let's say a campaign release in a new country, they both have different ways of thinking, data becomes the grounding element. Product and brand, data becomes the grounding. So anecdotally, the functions where we have seen friction in the past, data is increasingly becoming the grounding factor. For example, if I want to, and I'll give you like real life examples, but sales may have a very different picture of which markets should we penetrate more in. Marketing may have their own paradigm of this is what we should be doing. But what data does is it creates a graph for you. It tells you this is the baseline, this is the best you can do, this is the realistic you can do. So it gives you like a shape around which you can think. So it provides a guardrail for both the teams. And it's very useful, especially in things where, every quarterly, for example, we at Twilio, we have to set targets for, okay, this is how much revenue or sales or profit we're going to make. And you have to do that across multiple teams. Because when we talk about, let's say, profit, there's marketing element, there's sales, there's product, there's brand. There are so many teams involved. Everybody has to contribute to that profit. And data is what actually helps us understand this is where we are, this is what each of the team could contribute. So that's what I've seen happen more and more, because previously I've seen some of the companies, especially in my consulting career, like there are firms which have all of these teams. They all have, even they into the shared data service, they have their own data science teams, for example. And they're all building their own stuff. And the vocabulary differs so much, and that historically creates confusion. But I think a lot more teams are moving towards data as a shared service. So that helps ground them target setting.
Yeah, I agree. And what I could say is I believe the data team brings the structure in all of this communication. So when all of this starts, like the collaboration is when you are addressing a problem. So there's a problem that happened and come to a collaborative effort to solve the problem. So usually we could quantify it using the data, and every team has the right to use the data. So where data team comes in place is to enable that and make it more powerful. So what I felt even in Fulocker we do is we come as a communication medium, and we know that we are able to measure it at the right time and with the guidance of these teams who work with us. So like Piyush mentioned, it's bringing that structure in place, and each team brings their own expertise. So we know where to make it work and what to use to make it work, and we brings that measurement to all of this innovation. So I think that is key for any of these projects to happen, and we kind of make sure that everything is at the way measured in a KPI form, and we know it's a success. So one of the example I could say is we could be deploying an app, which is because of some problem that we notice in a certain stores or certain retail product issues. So when we work together in a collaboration, we know what we are addressing, and data is at each stage helps to measure it. And with collaboration, we kind of see it as addressed liability at the right place. And once it is success, it's not even a full stop for these projects. We have to measure it ongoing. There could be a testing phase, there will be implementation phase, and that's where we will step up and see that it's a success or not. Is the product really working or it's not working? If it's not working, we will know this collaborative team to come in action and make sure that it's working. So that's where, the direction has to be clear. Otherwise, when you go to the collaboration without the data team, suppose we have a scenario like that, it can be a big mess because, everyone can blame each other. Product is there, but we are doing everything to make sure it's working, but no one knows why it's not working. And there can be a lot of direction that it goes, but we know where exactly is the problem, and we let the team solve that problem. So data team helps in that communication, make sure that everyone knows what they're doing, and we kind of make that bridge works, and we kind of form the central part of this collaboration. So I feel that's very pivotal for data team to be there.
Yeah. And then in collaboration, like why would I collaborate? I think the very fundamental premise to this is if I trust you, I will collaborate. I think what data does is it just makes everything so objective. Like, this is the truth, this is what it is, this is what we have done, this is what we can do. So especially in, like I said, I think the biggest barrier to innovation that I have seen personally is just people not trusting each other. And this was a lot more evident 10 years back. But what data is doing a lot more now, this is what we have done as sales, for example. This is what came from marketing, this is what came from product, this is what came from sales. So just providing this credit sharing in a very objective fashion to different teams, it just allows people to trust each other a lot more. Like, I know, like if I'm a part of sales and I know that, I hit my target last quarter because of what marketing did or what product did, I'm going to collaborate with you a lot. And that's not possible without data, or only possible with data.
Yeah. I think it again boils down to, like data provides the structure and everyone can see the data. The data is just there. It's not lying, right? So yeah, okay. Very interesting way. I've never really thought about it that way before. So yeah, and I think in terms of that, especially with, working with different teams, and we talked about communication and things like that, how do you improve this cross-functional collaboration? Because, sometimes I'm not sure if it's happening with you guys, but sometimes I think certain teams might not understand the business or the organization as well. So how does that come into play? Does the marketing team help the data team to understand the business better? Or, what are some of the things that they can sort of bounce off each other, like the different teams? Yeah. How do you improve that?
I can go first. What I have seen is, yes, of course, sometimes when you address a problem, certain teams know what is happening and they share the business knowledge and domain indeed. So what happened is I've seen recently or in many of my projects that the team gives us some of the clear initiatives, like where you have to do what exactly is happening or how they have found a way to solve it. Maybe not very structural, not very data way, but they know a solution to it. So actually, many of the projects, we believe that the data teams hold the data. We know how to handle the data, but the business knowledge is the key. So we always have a collaboration with these teams to know the flow. So it is always important for any of the data person, be an engineer, be an analyst, be an architect, to know what is the foundation of your business and know how the components work together. Otherwise, you can never solve what you're solving. The data never makes sense to you, and you never get the flow to correct such issues. So that is always coming from the business. But to share, sometimes I've seen a law from business when they want to share it. Many teams may be offered to share it, seeing it's a collaboration effort, and they'll kind of help us. But some cases I've seen they don't like to share it. It may be because they feel like we are kind of taking something away from them, like taking that part and automating. So they might not have enough items in their plate or things like that. Or sometimes they just don't feel like sharing it. So that is some things I've seen in some of my previous work where there is a block in there. But I believe when you educate and you kind of do a certain way of approaching them, then we have to break that barrier and kind of make sure that we get the information out of that. And it is never to stop anything, but just to improve the process overall. So they could work on better things rather than doing something quite manual, or maybe that is something easily data solution, but no one is doing it. So it kind of helps, but we have to break this kind of barriers and make sure that we get the trust and let them know that we are not taking away anything from the business, but it's more of helping them. So that kind of communication and trust and that link is something very key to establish when you work with the business and get the information, share.
Yeah. Sounds a bit similar to the implicit thing that Piyush was talking about.
That's all the best practices I see in how data teams have helped improve collaboration, just more trust in the system. So I think this is people, process, platform component. People is basically sort of what Devi was saying, but we are seeing a lot more emergence of these roles called analytics translators. These may not be people who are completely in data or completely in business, but they are the orchestrators. They act as a bridge between data and businesses, and think of them like shared circle. And what they basically do is they provide this sort of simplification as a service to businesses. Like as a sales leader, I may not understand what's in the data, but this analytics translator would help bridge that gap. This is one of the roles where a lot more companies, especially the ones which have sort of a center of excellence is built, like large shared services operators, they have these roles. Even in companies where we don't have these roles, a lot more people are focusing on communication and not just data, like hardcore data. So that's one part which the data teams are doing. The process part, again, it's very straightforward, but how do you document better? How do you communicate better? And it's also linked to the platform, the third part which I mentioned, because now there are platforms which allow you to create a singular way of working in the communication. Like we use Asana or Jira or Trello to do project management. The data teams can enforce a lot more of that. Just because they have access to all these functions, it becomes a lot more easier for data teams to provide that platform access. Again, looping back into the last part that Devi said, one of the biggest challenges with data, which I think remains unsolved to a very big extent even today, is just how you interpret data. With more people coming into play now, who are actually interfacing with data, we are seeing marketing has its own data science function, for example. Sales will have its own function. And what's happening because of that is there is a little bit of duplication that's happening in how people use that data. Either it could be to create models or create features or just create some presentations or dashboards. But we're starting to see a lot more replication. A same metric may be interpreted in a very different way by marketing versus sales versus. That still remains a challenge, but I think there are a lot more platforms coming into the ecosystem now, which provide sort of these like technically like metadata normalized. So, like they tell you, okay, this feature is to be interpreted in this way across all the functions. But that is one part that still remains unsorted in my opinion.
So it's also important to have the right tools.
Oh, definitely. Especially with things going remote. Like, how do I discuss something with you? How do we discuss that? Especially when we have 20 people from 4 different teams working together. Platforms have to come into play.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. And I think, you mentioned about the analytics translators and also about the marketing team having their own data science department within that. Sort of a privilege to me, like when it comes to bigger organizations, that's what I feel. But what about when it comes to smaller teams? Like how would you think that sort of like collaboration can happen instead of,
Collaboration in a smaller teams.
yeah, like because, like having an analytics translator, having the data science team within the marketing team. Not all companies have that sort of resources to have a dedicated data team within, and have people in between. But what about for smaller sort of companies, like maybe, it seems like you have to wear more hats, right? And be able to do it themselves rather than have someone to depend on. So, any advice there on how those people who may be struggling with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I started my career with this company called Mishra. It's an analytics firm. It was the first of its generation. We're a very small team. I think I was 100th employee there. And we didn't have the privilege, like you said, of analytics translator, but we had to work with large Fortune 100, 500 companies. The one thing which I have seen companies do right is when they do the hiring. It's very easy to, and especially for companies that have a lot more business-facing stakeholders, it's very easy for someone to go and hire someone who's very strong technically, but can't speak business at all. A very easy way to fix the problem of not having the privilege to get an analytics translator is to get someone who can understand business. Because, in the end, all the work that the data teams do, they all have to tie back to a top or a bottom line KPI. Like it has to start with a why. Like why am I doing this, and then trickle down to the core. So hiring is one aspect where we can just make sure that, I'm not saying that hire someone who's a data scientist and a data engineer and I'm not saying that. I'm just suggesting that get someone who understands the business a little bit. Starts with the why and then goes down to what needs to be built. That's a very quick fix that I've seen a lot more startups, especially with the early stage Series A, focus a lot more on, because they don't have the budget or the resources to hire them. So they focus on hiring people who can evolve into a lot more business-facing roles.
We completely do that. I seen cases where they kind of have a central team, because when small companies, they start small, they'll get a share, a resource that could be floating between the teams. But the part of that is when the data team is a central pool of resources, there could be a lot of conflicts, like which project to start with, where do you focus, and we need to give attention to everyone. But we could be starting small somewhere in such a setup, and we measure what projects we are doing, see the success factor and prioritize there. So, this project is a high priority, let's do it. And this team itself has to have a direction that they shouldn't belong to any team, but belongs to the key head of departments or the main team, so that, it's not having any conflicts or any change of direction. And that kind of setup, I feel, works, and this team could start small and get on certain projects and then bring a full idea of work. So that's a part of things I feel is place where small companies work, where the data team, it may not be the projects that they start with. They first look at the data, pool of data that they have, how data mature the company is. And this team, even though they may be small, have to, like Piyush mentioned, have to have the right set of people who can collaborate with the teams, and they could get the information ready, like the data need to be understood and they know what is the maturity of data. doesn't need any data transformation or digital transformation, and they should be able to drive it. And another thing I noticed is in some of the companies I work, we also train the business team, because that's a very essential privilege that we have, because, the team is quite powerful and they know everything and they can be slightly trained in data. So they could work as a bridge for this kind of projects. And the data team, even if they are technical, we could use the team to collaborate well with these trained resources. So that's a key way of working in such setups where you have a small team. Yeah, so that kind of helps.
And I said, I'm regretting saying analytics translator, but of course it's a privilege. But I think 80 to 90% of empowerment the data teams do, it's very one-on-one stuff. It's how do we document things? How do we have right communication channel? It's also very concerned. How do we make sure that there is transparency in the team, across teams? How can I as a manager, for example, provide an environment where there is more vulnerability for people to ask questions because one of the biggest barriers to data teams empowering businesses is people just don't know what questions to ask. And like what Devi said, a lot more training can be done starting from the data teams towards the businesses. I tell them, okay, this is how we think about these set of problems. These are the questions which you may ask. So that training and enablement is also very core component of how data teams are. But 80-90% of the empowerment is very basic. And you'll be surprised. But again, don't quote me on the numbers, but I think almost 3/4 of the companies still struggle with documenting stuff. There are tons of people, they're building these models and dashboards, and they're just focusing on getting stuff out to the stakeholders, into the market, and they miss out on the documentation. And 2 years later, they may go join another company, a new person comes in. That person doesn't know, how do I talk to the business? So documentation becomes a very key. I think I'm talking about very simple things, but these things are founded. This is the only way, very small companies have to start focusing from day one. If I'm building a startup, I have to make sure that if I have even one guy who is managing data today, that person knows that he or she has to document, he or she has to communicate, he or she has to feel comfortable enough to talk to businesses, ask questions.
Yeah. Okay. And I think because both of you are, you experience, you've been in the industry for a while, right? And I'm pretty sure you guys are in the positions that you're in because you're very good at understanding the business needs. So what's your advice, for people maybe who are a bit newer, data analysts or anything like that? How do they know about how do they gain that knowledge? Because I think that's one of the big struggles now in terms of when it comes to hiring the right people. Because some of them, this is something that you mentioned needs to be taught, right? So how do you learn? How do you teach? Yeah.
Maybe I can say what I experience is you need to break the barrier, talk to people. Okay. So for me, when I train the team, it's first getting to be deployed in each departments. Maybe in 2 days or 3 days, but they go in, they talk to them, they create a friendship or kind of a communication there, so that they know that we are here to help, and we also understand and learn from there. So that is key for any of the resources, even to be understanding the full company. It may be not practical if it's a very big company that you have a lot of departments to go by each, but you should at least know the essential persons who is key for the company, and you need to have a communication with all of them. Maybe it's a catcher, but the data team can catch up with them, casually understand what they're doing, what problems they're solving, and so these resources get exposure, and sometimes we learn a lot from this business teams, how they do it, how they manage it, and it gets easier for us to translate that into a data solution. So that's how most of the projects sometimes originate. So it's key for this resource to get to know the departments and the team. And it is, I would say it's essential for everyone. It shouldn't be like an agenda, but you just go out, meet them or talk to them virtually or whatever is available, that you get to know who is leading what and what is happening in each team. That is quite key for communication. So when that happens, everything gets easier, I would say. And you feel like belong to the company. Otherwise, you work as a data team in silos and you just develop a lot of things and you doesn't know how to work or make it released by the business team. So this kind of helps a lot. So communication is very key.
Yeah, and I think from what a company can do to support the new employees, I think having a good onboarding plan is definitely like one of the easiest ways to get things done. Like, and what Devi said, I think a lot more companies, like even at Twilio, our onboarding plan, it's typically a 60 to 90-day plan, but it's not only engaging the skill sets that's required for someone to be successful in their job, but also just building this rapport with the teams. And especially for teams, like, where both of us said, like marketing-centric teams, we have to work with, and it's not only marketing, but we have to work with so many functions. And everything that we do has so much interdependencies with other teams. Like, I can't build something in marketing without aligning with someone in sales, which means that I need to build that rapport with someone in sales. So how do I identify who is the right point of contact? How do we know what is the right set of discussions to have? Because in the end, and this is true for anyone who works in any part of the data landscape, but you are only as successful as your stakeholder. Like if you're making someone in sales hit their targets, you're doing a good job. Like if you ask me what is my KPI as a data team, I don't have a business KPI, to be honest, but my KPIs are what my stakeholders' KPI are. So as long as I have built that rep, I can feel then that they are getting support from me. That's what companies can do. I think and I had this challenge, especially when I started. Like you're seeing so many roles created. There's so much confusion around, okay, do I get into a data science domain or a data analytics or a data? There's so much overlap between these roles, but still they have been carved out so differently in the system. I think just getting out, talking to people, that definitely helps. Finding out someone who can be a good mentor. It will not necessarily be in the company, but that is sort of step one for anyone who is coming into the industry now. Like just having someone who can guide you on, who has the experiential learning. Because, you read all these blogs and theory can only teach you like 20%. I'm not saying that's not to be done, but apart from that, some of these experiential learnings will come from someone. Like you need a mentor in the industry.
Okay, true. And I think speaking about this, like finding a mentor, making sure you're having that right communication. Remote work is such a big thing now, and both of you are sort of working with very like international teams, right? How do you do? Because earlier on you mentioned about body language, meeting the person. How are both of you facing this challenge? Or I'm not sure if it's a challenge. Maybe it's something very easy for both of you, but how does it work?
Yeah, I can say I think it started in international space. Of course, we get to have virtual communication, and even with COVID, it became more like a easier way of communication, even within a team who was in the same location. But in the initial stage, I felt it kind of make me think twice before I set up a meeting. And to plan everything ahead when you're virtually communicating. But at the same time, if you're in a location, you could be doing the same thing in a few minutes. But this may take hours just to plan and get the person's schedule and do it right. That is something I felt like a challenge in the start. But currently, I feel we need to let go of all of that and just make sure that you get to a space. You need to understand the way to talk to the team and get more people. You optimize the meetings so that you get more people in the call and do it virtually and make things very planned. Like you need not to be having hours of meeting, but have a short call, know what it is, clear it, and keep a plan when to catch up again. So I felt that happening, and especially when you talk to a team in Europe or US, I feel like there is a lot we could do virtually. So that is a way that makes communication currently very easier. So it's like you are easily reachable and you can talk things that through this medium, but sometimes you can still feel the difference when you do physical meetings and this one. Yeah. But I just feel it still works, the virtual meetings. But some things works easier when you're meeting in person, I would say. But especially for technical roles or data roles, I feel it still kind of works virtual meetings. But it may not be a challenge, but you need to work around of what you're doing and how you want to do it. So it needs to be planned a little more better than you're doing it in physical meetings. So that planning makes it all better, I felt. Yeah. So that's something I miss.
You obviously miss the touch and feel of being in office. Like until 29, I was in office meeting people. It's just so easy to align and move forward. Like when you have people in there. Initially, I think there was a lot of which like everybody was struggling with how do we work together. But I think now, and this goes back to the point we discussed about how can we improve collaboration. So we spoke about people, process, platform. I think the process and platform part is where it becomes a lot more easy. Like if I need to discuss something with my counterpart in US, do I need to have a call to get stuff done? Definitely not. Do I need to talk to the counterpart in US just to build a relationship? Definitely yes. But I think if we just think about what does business need to move forward in this remote setup, I think the right process and platform, that's what they come into play. Like Shopify, it's a company I respect so much, tremendously. Fantastic product, tremendous growth, such good culture people. And they decided to just kill all the meetings. I'm not sure what's the current status, but a couple of months back, they just said that we won't have any meetings. So if a company as big as Shopify can take up all that, we can still get stuff done by not having these virtual or in-person meetings, and anybody can. I think a lot more companies are becoming comfortable. Like if you ask me, 2020, like how is it going for you? It would have sucked tremendously for. It's so much better. It's all because of just how companies are evolving their processes.
Yeah. I think if we spoke about like remote work and how to collaborate, we can go on forever. So I think unfortunately that's about all the time we have for today. So thank you so much to both of you for joining us today and for providing all this knowledge and insight. I'm pretty sure it'll be great for our listeners to hear. So I hope everyone had a good time listening and discussing on this podcast based on collaboration in data. And thank you to our lovely audience as well for listening to us. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you all next time when we discuss another hot topic on the exchange by evolution.